What's good, everyone? Firstly, big thanks for all the support the last couple of days. You guys have been going crazy on my videos and I really appreciate that. We're getting real close to 3k, so that's awesome. Hopefully we can hit that by the end of the week. Today I'm going to be tackling one of the most requested video topics, animating fight scenes. This is going to be a full conclusive tutorial with literally everything you need to know, all condensed down into about 10 minutes.
Awesome!
Whilst the focus is on fight scenes, bear in mind a lot of these principles can be applied to just any kind of stop motion. I'm going to skip over the real basic stuff like lighting and using a stand. I'm also going to skip stuff like VFX and editing stuff, so we're focusing purely on improving the actual stop motion so that you guys can have your films looking like this. I'm going to break it down into a few main sections: ease in, ease out, camera movement, minifig movement, and practical effects. When I first started, my fight scenes were pretty trash, so I've pretty much had to learn all of this stuff just by trial and error, just by practicing, and I've gone through the process, so hopefully this can sort of speed up the process for you guys so you don't have to waste as long learning these things as I did. But yeah, that being said, if you learn anything from the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like. It really helps out the channel. But yeah, anyway, let's begin. Ease in, ease out. I think this is definitely the most important element to a fight scene. It can take something like this to this. The reason it's so important is because it's what gives everything weight. The punches feel real and hard. In real life, most movements follow this. Punches, kicks, cars, etc. all accelerate and decelerate. So if you hit like this, it looks pretty soft. But when you accelerate it, it looks a lot harder and more realistic. This is a super important principle as it's going to really sell the actions that you're trying to have your characters perform in. There's not many exceptions to this rule, but it's always a good idea to try and think out the action in your head before you do it. Make sure you take a lot more close together photos in the build up to the action and after it, whilst having bigger jumps in the middle. Also, you can think about the build up a bit more in terms of how your characters prepare for a movement. Like with a headbutt, for example, you'd usually first move your head back to gain momentum and power. So that's something else to consider, I guess. In terms of easing out, one thing that's kind of important to remember is stuff involving falling. Once you've hit the ground at full speed, you might think the movement is done because you can't really ease out by having them travel further down, but you've got to think about the recoil. It's some physics stuff. Basically every action has an equal and opposite reaction force.
Wow!
But basically the point is the body will recoil and bounce up. Not like a bouncy ball obviously, but people are made of organic matter, so their bodies are going to sort of bounce up a tiny bit before they fall completely still. Just something to bear in mind. But yeah, trust me, easing in and out of movements makes such a difference, and after a little while it becomes super easy, like second nature, so just give it a shot. Camera movement. Camera movement is another really important aspect. It makes everything feel way more dynamic and alive. It makes the viewer feel a part of the action. For instance, these two clips. The first one you feel much more like a spectator. The second one you're down on the character's level, moving with him, which is a lot more powerful. I like to think of the camera as a character in my film, and I animate it as I would any other character. It's really important that the camera moves smoothly and in time with the characters, so the principles of ease in and ease out apply to the camera as well. Also, you want to make sure you don't start moving the camera at different random axes, as it will look kind of weird. Try to stick to one direction and keep moving it that way, unless of course you're tracking an object in the film. In that case, just try and make sure that specific object remains in the center at focus for all your photos. When it comes to cutting and changing camera angles, there are two main cuts I like to use: hard cuts and soft cuts. An example of a hard cut is like when the angle completely changes. These are very powerful, and I suggest using these when either an action is ending or at the start of a new action. However, they can be used mid-action as long as you make it pretty clear what's going on. Soft cuts are something I use a lot more often as they're a lot more dynamic and feel way smoother. So I do these by easing into a movement with the camera, and then when I'm at the center of the movement, I'll cut to a new angle or part of the set and then start to ease out. These work really well, as sometimes you can even trick the eye into thinking it's not a cut and it's just one long shot. I generally use these a lot more, but each has their benefits, so definitely play around with moving the camera and see what works for you. But trust me, when you start moving the camera, it will make your films feel a lot more interesting to watch, even if the characters are doing the exact same stuff, and you'll soon find your own style. Also, just a side note, you can definitely build sets in a way where they are designed to move or spin, and this can be used to give the illusion of camera movement without actually having to move the camera. It will feel a lot more calculated, So it might not be the best for stuff like hand-to-hand combat because you want that to feel very natural, but I've made a whole nother video on that, so you can go check that after this one. I'll put a link in the description. Alright, minifigure movement. Seems really obvious, but what I actually mean is moving the minifigure outside the normal range of the minifigure body. This is quite an advanced technique, and I've only really started doing this consistently on my most recent projects, but it really adds a lot to your films. For this I use blue tack, which is kind of like sticky tack, I guess, and it basically allows me to pop the Lego minifigure's limbs out of the joints, so I can use a much wider range of angles and movements. Usually minifigures can only move like this, which for punches is kind of unrealistic. Punches are usually a lot more along the horizontal axis. So yeah, by unplugging their arms and reattaching them with a blue tack, you can achieve much more realistic range of motions. Another issue is that minifigures don't have the ability to bend at their elbows and knees, so you need to be a bit creative with this. I usually just cock the whole arm or leg back and then maybe add a twist to kind of look like this. The same goes for kicks as well, as I can't have them bend at the knees. This sort of setup really helps sell the impact without having to have the knee bend. Another option is having the body partially blocking part of the arm. This way you can create an illusion that it is bending just behind the body where the camera can't see. One last thing that I sometimes do is utilise perspective and camera angle to my advantage. There's some shots that would be really hard to capture the punches, as the figs would have to be so close together. So sometimes I set up the shot so that it looks like the minifigures are making contact, but in reality they aren't, it's just the angle of the camera and the perspective. Practical effects. Alright, so finally I want to touch on practical effects. I've done a much more in-depth video breaking down my practical effects, so if you want to watch that I'm going to put a link in the description, but I'm just going to go over some of the stuff again real quick because I get a ton of people asking about it. So for stuff like gunshots or any sort of superhero power like Thor's lightning or Iron Man's blasters, I like to use real Lego pieces. I just feel it adds more of a stop motion feel than doing like realistic VFX. I use these sort of pieces. The translucent power blast bits are really cool as well, and I also use a lot of lighting to show the effect on the environment. I use these little finger lights for stuff like that. I love these, and honestly I use them all the time. In terms of blood, I like to use a mix of this putty stuff that I've got as well as some VFX to show the blood spray. It works better than clay because it looks kind of wet like blood would. You can also use paint like this, but bear in mind that will damage your minifigures and you won't be able to get it off. I'm not really a fan of damaging Lego, but there's a few instances where I'd say it works really well, like this clip here from my Lone Knight brick film. There's no other way to really show the damage to the shield, and this makes the impact feel a lot more realistic, which I like. Other stuff like weather or settings such as snow, rain, sand, I like to use actual practical materials like flour or kinetic sand, or just spray the set with water for the rain. I think it really sells the environment you're trying to put across. So yeah, just think about stuff like that, how you could make the effect look more realistic. If you've made it this far and you're still here, thank you very much, I appreciate that. I hope this stuff helps you out. Obviously don't expect your films to become really good overnight. You know I've given you all the tools now, but you've got to use them and practice them. If you want to get really good, you're going to need to do a lot of practice. So while you're doing that, you'll definitely find new things that you like or things you don't, and you'll do things differently and develop your own style, which is cool. Even now after 8 years, I'm still learning new things and changing stuff up, and I know I've still got a long way to go, but hopefully this will help set you on your way. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.